Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation. And I should again thank you for the close collaboration between ICD and the Embassy of Mauritius. And I know that we've always been talking how to promote Mauritius, not only as a tourist destination, but also as an investment destination. And I'm really happy today that we have in our midst the Honorable Minister of Tourism, Mr. Anil Kumar Gayan, because he's been very kind. Despite his very busy schedule, he has agreed to come and deliver a lecture. Now, can you hear me? Yeah. Now, because I've looked at the title of the forum is about business and sustainability. So I'm going to present and raise issues relating to why should we redefine the alternative strategies for African partnership in attaining sustainable development. We're going to talk about basically about the African continent and what are the different strategies that we should adopt. And as an ambassador, I have been forced, I have been tamed to speak the truth in a diplomatic way and learn really how to bury the sleeping monster of economic activism. I used to be an economic activist, no more, okay? And the rigor of a trained economic professor. I used to have these things, but then I will leave all provocating analysis and rigor to specialists and professors. But I'm going to raise some issues, okay? And set the platform for a fruitful discussion and raise, obviously I'll raise issues relating to the Africa strategy. Now, let us look at the puzzles today. As you know, when you look at the world economy today, okay, there are so many elephants, you know, crushing the already fragile world economy. And if you look, they are cutting. There are lots of leaders, they are cutting the green shoots when it does not conform to their agenda. If you look at the world economic order today, I think you know what's happening. We look at the problems in EU, the Brexit issue, the US administration, problems at the World Trade Organization, the rise in, now there's a country to country, much more, instead of multilateral relationship. If we look at what's happening in the world today, there's the rise of India, there's a China bashing going on. You know, people are talking about the human rights, about the debt trap, about how China is lending lots of money to many countries and taking over some of the countries. But then we have to remember, because we should not forget that in the past, you know, there were major debt traps, which was, you know, engineered or fostered by Europe. And then, which was the country which created the financial crisis? We all know about it. And then you have the old legacy of the colonial masters. Now, when you look at the title, I try to say the title contains three main words: redefinition, partnership, and sustainable development. Okay? There are issues and challenges addressed for decades on Africa. As you know, on the African continent, there has been many trial and errors. And the impact on Africa, whatever policies so far, has been trivial and not robust. For many specific countries in Africa, even for Mauritius at some time, there has been bouts of economic prosperity, but they have relapsed, and many countries are at the crossroads. Why redefinition? The first question is, have the African countries really defined their strategies? Have they been free to really define what strategies they want to have? A redefinition means two things. Either the policies and the strategies crafted so far has not been effective, or they have not attained their objectives. Remember the Berlin Conference in 1885. Today there is so much talk about Africa. In 1885, in the Berlin Conference, remember, there were 16 diplomats, They wrote the history of Africa. And then a number of institutions, World Bank, IMF, etc., they also tried to write the history of Africa. There has been various periods, if you look at the history, the economic history, there has been various periods and strategies, the pre-colonization, the colonization period, to the World Bank, IMF gap, and the regional groupings. So what are the policies which have been used in Africa and elsewhere? Liberalization, trade liberalization, financial liberalization, capital account liberalization. Remember the financial crisis which really affected Africa. And if you look at Africa today, Africa suffered from commodity exports and exchange rate volatility. And today, the world economic order is changing, and one of the major problems is the climate change. There is no blueprint, exactly. There is no blueprint for Africa, for the African continent. And as you all know, there are many cliches. Africa is always portrayed, in the media, and the images are controlled by the West. But there are some blatant truths about Africa. We have poverty, political instability, obviously. Leadership, there's a problem with the leadership. Corruption is there, like everywhere. There's a population dislocation, migration, refugees, capital flight. One major problem is economic kleptocracy. What is economic kleptocracy? Means that the leaders in Africa, in many countries, once they are in power, they try to use the government, they try to use the property of the government as their personal assets. It's known as economic kleptocracy, which is something very wrong, which all African countries suffer. Bad governance, obviously, due to economic kleptocracy, insecurity, bad quality of life, and the problem is in the education system. But Mauritius, we've been successful in many ways, I don't need to introduce Mauritius because as an ambassador, I'm very proud to be the ambassador of Mauritius. Everywhere I go, I say, I am from Mauritius. They say, Mauritius or Mauritania? I said, Mauritius. They said, oh, this is a wonderful country. So we are an example of economic miracle in the early 1980s to mid-1990s. We've done very well based on, the sugar protocol, the multi-fiber agreement. We had very good conditions even up to now. We have political stability, good governance, availability of labor, qualified labor. We have very good institutions and the rule of law. When you look at the ranking of Mauritius, in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of the rule of law, we are very high. But then, like many other African countries, we also had our problems, because many African leaders, they don't keep the social contract. The social contract is very important. That is the relationship between the government and its mandate. You have to maintain that. Then there's a political capture at times by elites and technicians. In many African countries, I won't say exactly in Mauritius. Again, I come to the issue of economic kleptocracy. Liberalization. Liberalization is a policy which has been forced, at times in Africa and African countries where we find a public monopoly converted into a private monopoly. And the private monopolist finally earns economic rank, which something which could have gone to the people, it goes to the capitalists. Then you have labor market distortions, and you have a big lobby from the private sector. So one problem is political economy and soft budget constraint. This is the major problem in African countries. Even in Mauritius, we also face this problem. What is the soft budget constraint? We tell the private sector, okay, we privatize one organization, but then there's a soft budget constraint. Okay? They want market, they want the free market, they want privatization. The policy, there's a reform, but then they continue to depend on the government. Okay, it's known as soft budget constraint, because the moment they know that they have this guarantee from the government is going to intervene and bail them out, it becomes a moral hazard problem. It becomes a problem, and this is where African countries suffer a lot, because they know that the government is going to enter, and due to political reasons mainly. We have a big problem in economic, and we have social and economic injustice. I think it's everywhere, especially social injustice, because this is where the government should be there crafting the right policies to redistribute income from the rich to the poor. But I should tell you that in the case of Mauritius, there's a lot of things being done. Under the correction of our minister, okay? We have introduced recently the negative income tax, okay? We've got the minimum income, which is also there. But if you look at in Mauritius, university is free. Education is free. Health is free. I think that's why we call Mauritius a paradise, you see? Okay? Now, the problem in Africa is the moment you start doing the reform, which is laid down by World Bank and IMF, you know, their reversal in reform, which is bad. Once we start some reforms, the moment problems start like unemployment and other problems, there's a reversal in policy. We badly need human resource planning and the education system to really adapt to countries in Africa. Finally, complacency, you know, once we start doing well, that's why we call it, you know, in Africa, we call it economic vampires, you know. World Bank call it the economic vampires. Whenever an African country does well, okay, you have vampires, you know, all around it, trying to suck, okay, all the fruits of development. This is the problem, okay? So it's known as the economic vampire syndrome. Now, why the redefinition today? I think we are lucky that despite the poor performance, you know, that during recent times in Africa, we've been doing very well. Many countries are doing so well that, again, there is a renewed global interest in Africa. And many countries, Europe, Germany, even many other countries are trying to go towards Africa now. There's a big competition. China, you know, India, even America, they are trying to go into Africa. But then the African leaders, you know, now the expectations are high, and the aspiration of the African people also, aspirations are very high. They really want to achieve. That's why you will see internally, that's why you will see, let me use this. Now, it's very clear that the African continent is moving. Things are moving on the African continent. But then, with whom are we going to partner? This is the big question. There's a big, big competition. Now, who is going to decide with whom to partner? If you look in Africa, is trying to, have you heard about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? You know, this is something which Africa is trying to do on its own to open up the barriers, you know, to close all the, open up the barriers among the African countries so that they can have a big free trade area. But then they are trying to, we are trying regional integration in Africa, and you will see later that Mauritius is trying to position itself as a platform towards Africa. But there are new actors, China, India, Turkey, Europe. African are high performers. And I believe that with whom to partner is, we have to use, one way of partnering is we have to use the African diaspora. These are the people, you know, who's been doing very well. They are in Europe, they are very qualified. They are the people which can connect with their original countries, okay, where they come from, and try to see how to bring the technology and connect with Europe and with other countries which are doing very well. The question is now, I won't be long, let us look at some pertinent question now, okay? Mauritius, you know, is part of Africa, but African continent is non-homogeneous. Whom do we partner? Given the uncertainties, there are so many uncertainties now in the world economic order. If you look at the role of technology, people are talking about innovations. There's so much of insecurity, even climate change. And there's a change in the regime. There's a rise, there's an emergence of the right wing. Okay? What economic model should Africa follow? And it's a big question for all of us. Germany has been trying to come up with a Marshall Plan, okay, based on, there are some conditions, such as they look at the economic activity of the country, peace and security of that country, the rule of law and democracy. And my question is, if a country's economic activity is good, if there is peace and security, if there is already rule of law and democracy, we don't need other countries. The country itself can develop by itself. Why should we help other countries? We should help other countries because they have lots of limitations, they have problems in all these, in all these activities, in all these conditions. Now, what are the motives of Europe, for example? Is it they are against migration, or they are looking for markets to export their products, or is it there's a competition now between Europe and China, Europe and India, America and China? So when you look at the world economic order, I have a feeling that Africa, the strategy that Africa should develop depends on many factors, and the development of Africa, okay, would definitely not only depend on these factors, they have to find the internal dynamics in Africa. African solutions should be designed by Africa, okay? Mauritius, you know, we are lucky to be in Mauritius. Mauritius is trying to develop as a platform for Africa. We are trying to redefine our strategies. If you look at Mauritius, for example, we are preparing ourselves for the post-Brexit. We are trying to come up with new sectors, artificial intelligence, fintech, the blue economy there, medical hub, among others. And even when you try to look at the tourism industry, the minister, I'm sure, is going to talk about the tourism. I won't dwell in his area. He's an expert in tourism now. Okay? And let me conclude. My conclusion is that if you really want to develop business, if you really want to develop the African continent, Africa should consolidate, obviously, this is obvious, its ecosystem, and it should try to develop its internal markets and try to think in terms of a free trade area for the whole Africa. Africa should be able to negotiate and have a win-win situation. The question is, why is it that there is so much of bashing against China? There's so much of bashing against investment from India in Africa? Because Europe has been investing. Europe has been capturing the African continent for so many decades, for more than a century. Okay? So the question is, what is the partner which Africa needs, you know, so that Africa develop? Finally, the destiny of Africa should be traced or should be defined by Africans. But with the right partners, we think about the global interest and in particular, the development of Africa. I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you. Yeah, please. I have raised so many issues, but if you have any specific question, I can just answer you.
Hello, I'm intern here at the ICT, and I was wondering how Mauritius is coping with climate change, if it's affecting the country.
Yeah, no, definitely Mauritius has a small island economy. We are suffering from the climate change effect in terms of our agriculture, even changes in the weather condition. Okay, we have flash floods, and there are many other issues, even the production of agricultural products. And even if you look at the marine life, we are suffering from climate change. But then, Mauritius, we are taking a lot of action. At least there's a Ministry of Environment in Mauritius, even the government is very serious about the climate change issue. Many actions are being taken. Even if you look at, for example, we are Mauritius is one of the countries which have signed, the protocol in France. And then there are many policies. For example, the use of plastic, okay, which is being done, which is being, banned in Mauritius. They're trying to work on that. And then in terms of the conservation of environment, there are many policies, even the budget in Mauritius, they have crafted a number of policies dealing with the environment. I think we do have our problem, but then we are trying to design policies which would deal with that. But we are also trying to get, technical assistance from many countries, including Germany, in order to deal with the problems of climate change. But the climate change problem is not only a Mauritian problem, it's a world problem, and it needs, international, cooperation to deal with the climate change. Because any other question? Yes.
So yesterday we had a presentation from Zambia, and this is a country that's very dependent on copper, as I think you said more than 80% of their GDP. And I know that in Mauritius they have a problem that tourism is a huge part, like it's kind of what the GDP is dependent on in the country. So what does your country do? I know that like with copper it will eventually run out, and tourists, there will always be tourists, so that's a positive thing. But what does the government of Mauritius try to do to diversify the economy?
Yeah, this is one of the things which, which I should congratulate even the ministers here, congratulate all the governments, We've been, first of all, we were very dependent on sugar, at one time in 1970s. But then following that, there has been a lot of diversification of the economy. We went into the textile, we had the export processing zone, we went into tourism. Tourism is a major pillar in the economy. And then after that, the government has been trying to come up with a number of sectors. We call them, the pillars of the economy. The medical hub, the educational hub. Now we have the blue economy. Now we are going into fintech. Even the financial services sector is doing very well. I think Mauritius, we are quite safe in that direction, because I think there is a foresight, and the government is planning, there's continued diversification of the economy, which is really making Mauritius progress. Good. Okay, thank you very much.